On today's episode of Secrets to Scaling Your E-commerce Brand, I got to talk with e-commerce ops expert Joel MacPherson. We talked all about what some of the big issues that he's seeing with Amazon sellers, with direct consumer sellers, with all of these different haircuts that people are taking that you probably don't even know. The amount of money lost when you're importing goods is actually crazy. The amount of money that you're losing when you send stuff to FBA is crazy. There's just a lot of craziness out there. We walked through his favorite hiring process that he has really dialed in over the years. You guys are not going to want to miss this one. Hey guys, Jordan West back with another episode of Secrets to Scaling Your E-commerce Brand. Today I am joined by a fellow Canadian on the complete opposite side of the continent, New Brunswick. For you Americans, you're probably like, I don't know what that is. It's north of Maine. Okay, it's north of Maine. That's what you can think of. Anyway, really excited to have this conversation today about hiring overseas teams. We're going to get into a bunch of different ops issues. But one of the biggest headaches that I've seen over the years is hiring teams in-house. But Joel, before I introduce you and everything, do you want to talk about a tweet I saw yesterday from the former CMO at Wing? Really amazing tweet about what happened when they went public. So, they did incredible, were, profitable, I believe, to a point, went public, and then he started hiring, had this entire team that was just so ridiculously bloated, finding that he actually wasn't getting any more output out of the team. And I've had these conversations. One of my buddies owns and runs a massive music lesson company. And same thing. He came to me about a year ago. I was going to do the Trump thing, tears in his eyes, wondering, what was wrong.
Yeah.
But he came to me and he's like, look, I took my marketing team from 5 to 30 and we're not getting anything extra out of them. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard this so many times. So I gave him a few solutions. Today, we're not going to be talking about my solutions. I really want to hear from Joel. And I think Joel is much more of an expert out there. So without further ado, Joel MacPherson from True Ops. Joel, welcome to Secrets to Scaling Your E-commerce Brand.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. You mentioned about that tweet about like adding more people, like not necessarily resulting in more output. And like, I've definitely found the same. It's very counterintuitive. You know what I mean? You feel like you add more like horsepower, like you're going to get further, right?
And you don't.
Yeah, you definitely don't. I don't know if you ever heard of like, Netflix, No Rules Rules, like they're all about talent density.
No, I've actually never read the book. Isn't that the title of the book? No Rules Rules?
Yeah, No Rules Rules.
Yeah.
They have, you can read like a smaller portion of it. Like they have like kind of like a culture deck like on their website. And it's really like talent density is one of the biggest pillars. And it's really about like the more people you add, like the more communication overhead you have, the more management overhead you have. And it's like a computer chip, like the smaller that it is, the more productive that it is because, there's more going on in like one head and less like communication that has to happen. You know what I mean?
One of my executives yesterday at one of our companies was like, the next hiring that we need to do is we need to hire more middle management. And I was like, I want to puke with you saying that. No, we don't. No, we don't.
Mm-hmm.
That is not what we need to do. We need to hire more people who get stuff done.
Yeah.
That is what we need to do. Anyway, that's this certain circumstance. Sorry, Joel, for people who I'm like jumping all over the place today, guys. I'm a little fired up today. I had something happen earlier today that had all to do with somebody using my likeness on a post on Twitter and a review that I never wrote. And I don't know if you guys know, trust is the most important thing to me. If you guys follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn, I am not BSing you. This is what I care about. This is the biggest currency that I have is authenticity and trust. And so if you want to get me pissed off and fired up, then go ahead and say I said something that I didn't say and reviewed a product that I don't think is good and said that it's good. So that is where I get fired up. So just throwing that out there. So if you're like, wow, Jordan, you're really elevated today. It's like, yeah, I am. Joel, for people who don't know anything about you, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to these days.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my name is Joel and I've been in e-commerce operations for probably over 5 years now. And it's typically been in the back office capacity. So anything related to, finance, supply chain, like that's been my thing. But what I found, like when I come into a company, like the scope of what I'm doing just keeps expanding and expanding to the point where like, it's pretty much everything because like, if I want to, have a company's finances in order, like you have to get their inventory in order. And if you want to get their inventory in order, you're going to need people to do that. and you have to find
Mm,
those people. So all of a
yeah.
sudden you end up like doing talent acquisition, doing inventory management, cash forecasting, and you kind of get this whole picture of what's necessary to accomplish what you're looking to do. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been up to, working with Shopify sellers, Amazon sellers, and recently getting into specifically with Amazon sellers, like helping out with Amazon reimbursements, like Amazon, like many third parties is often less than completely trustworthy with everything you send in. So think of it as kind of like a third party to keep them in check. So yeah.
So right before this episode, actually speaking of that, I saw a post from a former guest on the podcast, Chris Mead, about an Amazon inventory issue,
Mm.
which was he got some random bill that he's never gotten before for $26,500 for
Wow.
Amazon storage.
Yeah.
Guys, none of us know what we're doing. No matter how big we look and how much you guys respect, the things that I'm doing or what Chris is doing, or doesn't really matter. Publicly traded companies like Wink, like we talked about before, we're
Mm.
all just trying to figure this thing out, right?
Yeah.
And so having experts like Joel, really like people who actually know what they're doing when it comes to being able to potentially fight stuff like that or figure out
Yeah.
what's going on, is really important to have people like this in your corner. Joel, I want to pivot over to what it looks like when you start to work with a company on the ops side. What are some of the biggest issues that you're seeing? You brought up inventory before, and we're going to talk a bit about staffing and
Yeah.
potentially where we find these staff. What are some of those biggest issues that you're getting into right away?
Yeah, so I think it all comes down to like holding third parties accountable. I call it kind of like supply chain attrition. So just like you mentioned, like with Chris, getting that surprise bill from Amazon for like $26,000 for storage. If you take that one example and just kind of blow that up across your whole supply chain, like you can just imagine like what can go wrong, like maybe your vendors are shipping a little bit short every shipment, maybe it's
Yeah.
intentional, maybe it's not. Once it gets to the 3PL, take a haircut, 2 to 3% goes missing there, and then you send it into Amazon, and then a couple percentage goes there. So it's really just this gradual attrition. Like I've got 4 kids of my own, and I see it kind of like as these vendors, these third parties, or even some of your in-house people, it's kind of like having a bunch of kids, and like they're great and they're wonderful, but if you don't supervise them for even just a
Oh,
day,
like a minute?
it gets ugly. So, you've got, your 3PL losing 60 grand of your stock because you hadn't been reconciling it for a year. And if you're not on top of it, it's like, who pays the bill for that? Unfortunately, usually the founder. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. I mean, who else does it go to, right? And
Yeah.
who's being held accountable? Who has
Mm.
time in the brand to hold these people accountable and even know where to hold them accountable? Funny,
Yep.
actually, because before this, our sponsor this month is Portless, and so I was actually
Mm.
talking about a lot of those issues that they actually end up solving with the direct fulfillment from China, which is another thing that we'll get into at some point. Maybe not on today's episode, but definitely a very interesting way to cut out of a ton of those potential touch points and expenses. Like even like the
Mm.
amount of times we've been hit with, we import all of our fabric for Little and Lively from China,
Mm.
and the amount of destuffing fees that we've been charged over the years.
Yep.
And it's not just these little 2% haircuts. It's the
Yep.
time, right? It's the time to
Mm.
be like, oh my gosh, are we even going to be able to manufacture in time? We don't know.
Yep. Yep.
That's the other big thing that I'm seeing. Also, Joel, I want to point out, I totally was like, oh, you are definitely a dad. At least a dad. If there's something about us dads that we can see it in each other. So
Yep.
just wanted to just point that out, that makes a lot of sense that you're a dad of 4.
Yep. Yep. I think that, yeah, it also ties back to that discussion about running lean, because like you want to balance like running lean, but you also need to have an adult in the room, like,
Yes,
right?
we talk
Like,
about that all the time. Who's the
yeah,
adult?
yeah, exactly. Like, I've come into companies, it's like, okay, what to do? Gold star, you've done it with 5 people, but like that one person that would have cost you like 3 to 4 grand a month would have saved you like over 100 grand in, missing inventory if they were able to like watch for it and be the adult in the room. You know what I mean?
Oh,
So,
absolutely. Let's get into hiring here in a second.
mm,
Before I start asking you a bunch of questions about hiring and where we're going to hire and how we're going to find these people and all of this different stuff, because this is essential. I just want to say two books that have changed my life when it comes to this. So number one is Who Not How by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy.
mm,
Just phenomenal. Like anything by Dan Sullivan, guys, there is a reason why Strategic Coach is one of the biggest coaching programs out there. I still haven't pulled the trigger on it. I think it's like 40K a year or something, but I just get as much as I can from Dan Sullivan outside of that. But the other book is actually by another great Canadian. It's funny, all these Canadians writing great books. Canadians, there's just something about us, that's really
mm,
special. The other one is Dan Martell's book, Buy Back Your Time. And
mm,
those two books have really helped me with what Joel and I are about to talk about and actually identifying where some of those are, because I think that's one of the big issues, Joel. Like, I'd love for you to get into like, how do we know who to hire and
mm.
what we need to hire for? Like,
Yeah,
you know, founders have so much on their plate and they're just like, well,
yeah,
I can't hand any of this stuff off over. No one can do it as well as me.
yeah. Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. I think a lot of it is just kind of breaking down your organization into chunks. Like, I don't know, like if you've heard like EOS, like the accountability chart, right? Like just thinking about like,
Love EOS.
yeah,
Huge
yeah,
fan.
just thinking about like whose job is that? And if the answer is like, oh, we just trust the third party with that, then that's when you're should have like an internal check, like, okay, but like, can they really be ultimately responsible for this? Can I really just like trust the 3PL with everything that like, everything is fine, or like just completely trust the vendor sending exactly what I'm asking, you know, like the answer is no.
Yeah. And you can't do it yourself. You don't
Yeah.
have the time, founder.
Yeah.
A few founders are out there thinking like, oh, I'll just put that on my checklist. It's like, when? For
Yeah.
when? When are you going to check that? Because a 2% haircut, right, on a $10 million business is $200,000,
Yep.
right? It's very worthwhile for,
Yep.
for you to do. And yet, I'll bet you most of your skills as founders are not in logistics.
Yep.
I know mine aren't.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
where do you start to look to make that first hire, right? When you're like, it's just so painful. I need to figure out what to do. Where do you recommend when you come into a company that people start looking?
Yeah. I think it's really just about identifying those areas where there's going to be a clear return on investment. And I think that companies would benefit a lot by looking at ops as like a whole picture. I think that in a lot of companies, like finance is over here, supply chain is over here, and that kind of causes you to have to rely on third parties more because you don't have enough work for like one person full time necessarily for a while, right?
Mm. Hmm.
But like if you think about this kind of like ops analyst position where it's like they are helping coordinate your shipments, they are helping reconcile your inventory, and they're doing like some light bookkeeping, accounts payable, then all of a sudden like maybe you do have a role, you know?
Mm.
And there's a
That's an
huge
interesting tie-in. I
yeah.
I'm not sure if that's something that I've heard somebody come on here and say, but it makes a lot of sense to me. Ops and finance are like
Oh my
they're
gosh.
they're married,
Yep. Yep. Like, at Human Centric, I was their CFO, COO, and the company before that, Dahlstrong, they had a CFO, COO. And
Yeah.
it's because those two things, they go together really well. And it's hard to overstate the value of having a good, like, in-house, like, ops person. Like, you don't realize how much value you are kind of missing if you just piece out, like, every piece. It's like, okay, this is the bookkeeping firm. This is the logistics firm or whatever. But then, like, there's these gaps in between that just don't get filled because, oh, that's out of scope. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But
Yes.
if you've got someone full time dedicated, like you can fill those gaps. It's like, okay, well, maybe I do want to expand into Europe. Like, let's find a new 3PL. Maybe we need to review all of the duty imports from the past 3 years because try not to name drop anybody, but like the importing company has been screwing it up and like, we need to get back 300K worth of duties or whatever. That's actually happened. And if you're
This is
relying
this is not some hypothetical you're making up right
no,
now.
no, this is real life. And if you just have like, okay, like X bookkeeping firm or like X like 3PL and you as the CEO are just holding things together, you just don't have the manpower to like carry out that sort of thing and look out for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely. So where do you start? Where do you start looking? You just throw an ad up on Indeed in, I'm in Abbotsford, British Columbia. You start looking for locals around here that have these kinds of skills, or what do you start doing when you're thinking of like, who can I hire? Because I'm always thinking who, right? Who does this
mm,
person look like? Who is my who here? And that's directly from Dan's book.
yeah,
Um, and I love thinking like that.
yeah.
What role do I need to fill? Which is, really when, Dan Martell talks about in Buy Back Your Time is like, what are these things doing? And I just need to get them off my plate because they're
Yeah.
not 80% done by someone else is better than 0% done by me. So,
Yes,
um,
exactly.
where do you start looking, Joel, and where do you start making some of these recommendations?
Yeah, so I think like it's really about taking a look at what you're doing and also what other people in your organization are doing and just kind of splitting out like what is the value of that specific task, you know? And maybe a lot of what you're doing is, $50 an hour work or something like that. And you're going to need, you know, like a domestic, like highly trained person to like manage it, you know? Or maybe it's like heavily like execution task that can be done anywhere,
Yeah.
and then you can look at, sourcing from the Philippines or like Argentina to fill that gap. Yeah. And
Now,
I think go ahead.
interesting. You bring up Argentina. So I want to just kind of reiterate what you said there. So number
Hmm.
one, where does the person need to be? Do they actually need to be local? Right.
Yeah.
That's the very first question to ask. Like, is this a warehouse fulfillment person? Okay.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
probably cannot hire overseas. But is this potentially, somebody that is going to help with accounting and bookkeeping? Well,
Mm.
maybe then we look somewhere else. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about Argentina. So I just so
Hmm.
everybody knows, I am a massive fan of the Philippines. I am a
Hmm.
massive fan of Filipino people. I feel like I should have been born in the Philippines. Every time we talk, I'm like, we just get each other. I feel like Noreen, my assistant, is from the Philippines. She's going to be the one who is editing this. And she is
Mm.
just, Noreen, you are an incredible person. And same with a lot of our team members over our companies. But there's a big issue. Number one, context, right? A lot of times we've heard it said that people in the Philippines are a little bit higher context. And so you need to give more direct instruction, right? Which is
Yeah.
okay. So if you've
Hmm.
got your systems, that's awesome. But the other issue is just the time difference. It's a massive time difference. So interestingly, before Joel and I actually hopped on here, we were actually talking about hiring in Argentina. I'd love to hear
Mm.
why, number one, and then the kinds of roles that you're looking to fill from Argentina.
Mm. Yeah. So yeah, I agree. Like, the Philippines is awesome and like amazing talent can come from anywhere in the world. Like at one time I was trying to hire this person from the Philippines to help with like a finance manager esque type role, you know. At that time she was making like 150K, had like 30 subordinates, and she was just crushing it, from the Philippines. And I'm sure she
Wow.
was worth it, um, because like amazing talent can come from anywhere. I find,
150K in the Philippines?
yeah,
That's
that's
like a
right.
$1 million salary here.
Yeah, yeah. But you know what? Like, it with that many subordinates, that much responsibility, like, I'm sure she was just crushing it, you know?
Well, I'm sure she's
Um,
worth it all day.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. In terms of, like, hiring from Argentina, like, I'll usually look there for kinda, like, middle management type positions, I know that we were talking earlier and just, like, don't need more middle management. But it can be really helpful, like, if you're looking for, like, a supply chain manager,
Yeah.
especially, or, like, a controller type figure to think about Argentina. It's definitely there's less of a cultural gap, so, like, you don't necessarily have to translate your communication as intensely or tread as lightly, like, they're used to the more, like, direct communication style, which can be
Mm.
helpful, like, if you're going into, like, executive discussions and, like, they get it when you're asking, like, why isn't this done? Or like, what is that? Without having to be like, hey, I appreciate everything that you do and you're amazing. And also, please here's some feedback. But you're still amazing.
Yeah, but we need that as Canadians. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
we're talking to our American audience here, okay?
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, like you've got like Coca-Cola, ExxonMobil, Honeywell, like they're all setting up in Argentina, you know? Yeah. And so it creates it's like, sure, you can hire from any country in the world, but it can help to follow the bigger players because they kind of lay the foundation and like train up
Oh, I
these
love to
people.
look. I
Yeah.
love to look where the big guys are going because
Yeah.
they have way more data than we do.
Exactly. Yeah, so like, KPMG, Deloitte and all them, like they set up in the Philippines first. And that also like helps create that culture of like, working in US and Canadian cultures.
Yeah.
Whereas like maybe, a country like Ethiopia might have less exposure to that. Not saying
Mm,
a rock star couldn't come from there either, but you might have a higher concentration of like the white collar workers that you're looking for if bigger companies have come there before you. So
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That makes a lot of
yeah.
sense. There's also the currency issue right now, right?
Hmm.
With Argentina, right?
Yep.
They have like massive, what was their inflation last year again? It's like 60% or something.
I don't know. It's crazy, but yeah, offering USD can be a big competitive advantage when you're hiring from.
Yeah, massive competitive. I watched a lot of stuff on this with Argentina and how they're just like desperate for US dollars because their
Yeah,
dollar is just so degraded right now.
yeah,
So that's again a great thing to be able to offer, right, to people. Just remember, Joel and I probably most of the time work in USD for everything anyway. So
yeah,
I also don't trust the Canadian dollar. I'm sorry,
yeah.
Justin. I just don't think you're doing it right now. So
Hmm. Yeah.
because Justin Trudeau listens to this, just in case anyone's wondering. So.
Oh, good. I didn't know.
Could you imagine? Joel, what else do we need to know when we're hiring overseas? What other tips and tricks do you have that you've learned as far as systems for doing that? And what are some of the tools that you know of that really help you get the kind of people that will actually make a big difference?
Yeah. So I think that, growing up in the US or growing up in Canada, we're used to a much more uniform, like, there's, how can I say this? It's like opportunity is more widespread. Education is like more of a given. Like, yes, obviously, like you went to high school, you graduated, and then you went to university and like all that stuff. Like people are a lot more. The concentration of people trained can be higher. There's less divide between poor and rich. So like on average, the average person that you get, like it might your talent pool might be a bit more robust because of that, because of the equal opportunities that are available to everyone. When
Yeah.
you go to other countries where things are a bit more unstable, you can have a much wider top of funnel for your recruitment and you can have a much wider range of like quality of candidates. And so it puts a greater emphasis on like having a robust top of funnel to help like fairly and objectively measure like who's going to be a good fit for the next stage,
Yeah.
without introducing any like bias and stuff like that. So I find like if you're sourcing from anywhere really, we use the same process for, North America, for Argentina, for the Philippines. It's a application form through Breezy HR, which is great ATS. I tried
Cool.
out like 30 of them before settling on that one. Um,
Breezy.
yeah, Breezy HR gets the job
Sweet.
done
We'll
quite
make sure to
well.
put that in the show notes.
Yeah. And so you got your application form, and then you say, like, would you like to participate in a 10 to 15-minute aptitude challenge? Yes or no. Right. And 95% of people will opt into that, which is great, even in US, even in Canada. And the reason why we have that is like, obviously, you're going to have some candidates that just don't want to do an aptitude test ever because they are advanced in their career and they're not going to bother. You don't necessarily want to miss out on those candidates, because like, especially like if you're looking for a higher up position,
Yeah.
so you'd review those by hand, but it's a 10-minute challenge to expedite your application. And then
Yeah.
they do the assessment and it's extremely predictive for like how successful they'll be in the role. Like Canada uses IQ tests for their CRA auditors. The United States uses IQ tests for their military. There's definitely a lot of
Yeah, I didn't know that.
merit.
I didn't even know I didn't know you were allowed to do that.
Canada does it.
Okay.
They might
Okay.
not
Hey,
call it an IQ test, but it's like Susan is taller than Jane and Jane is smaller than Rob, who's the tallest. You know what I mean? It's like stuff like that. It's
you're not
like
going to make me answer that, right?
no, no, no. And that's not even a real thing, but like It's testing your problem solving capability, your general
Yeah.
aptitude,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And it's the only way to do it, top of funnel, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's one way
So
to very much weed out. And so
yeah.
then where does it go from there?
Yeah. So you put them through the aptitude thing, which I use Brick, by the way, which is BRYQ. And
Okay.
it's really good. Before that I had used my own test that I had built, but it was
Yeah.
it was it was ridiculous. It was like a 2 hour long exam, like
Okay.
my early days, blunder years.
Yeah.
And this is just as predictive as that was.
Cool. Yeah. So
Um,
Brick, we've used Test Gorilla. Seems to be a pretty decent one. There's a lot of different kinds on there. They
yep.
already have a bunch of pre-built ones for agencies specifically, which is nice. Just throwing that idea out there. Again, guys, remember anything Joel and I talk about, it's gonna be down in the show notes. Our team does just an incredible job of picking out what we talk about, putting those
Mm.
URLs down in the show notes. So please go and check those out afterwards. So after that, what's next?
Yeah. So like after you've picked out your threshold, your top performers from that, I guess there's a couple of other things that are in the application form that are very useful. A 1 minute video pitch, which
Awesome. We
I
do that
find
all the
just
time.
yeah, just 1 minute. I feel like it's very powerful because
Yeah.
I feel like half the interviews that you're in, within the first minute.
Oh yeah.
You
It
know,
weeds people out so fast.
yeah,
So fast.
yeah,
Or puts them in very
yeah.
fast too.
Like I had this candidate fellow, and hopefully he never finds this podcast, but he did so well on the aptitude. And then a 1 minute video pitch, it's like, the question is like, what are your greatest accomplishments, right? And he's
Yeah.
just like, oh, well, like, I've almost published a romance novel and it's gonna be good. This is for a bookkeeping position. Yeah. So,
That's
s
great. That's I love that.
yeah. So yeah, like I feel like
Maybe he didn't understand what bookkeeping meant. Maybe he thought it was book writing.
yeah, perhaps. But yeah, I feel like, yeah, like when you're in an interview within the first minute, but you stick around for the full 15-30 minutes because it's polite. But yeah, you can tell a lot from someone from that. I also ask for their words per minute, like typing wise.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, because like even if you are an Einstein level genius and you can present yourself in 1 minute like the most amazing person in the world, if you can't use a computer, it's not going to work. You
Yeah,
know,
totally.
so like
You can then communicate that out.
yeah, yeah. So like if you're like 1 word per minute, you're like hunting and pecking, and it's like, yeah, it's not gonna work. So those are the three things really, just like the getting the general aptitude, the words per minute, and the 1 minute pitch. So then once you're through that, you've got a decent amount of stuff to look at, you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely.
Yeah. And from there, typically I would book like a 10-minute call with them to get them excited about the role and ready for like the next step. And then a paid trial project that's specifically based on the role that you're
Cool.
hiring for.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great. Very similar to the process that we've kind of fallen into over the past few years. I mean, guys, we've hired so many people over the years and made so many
Mm.
mistakes as well.
Yep.
So hearing that this is your process, I'm like, we've fallen into this too. Joel, why couldn't you have talked to me 5 years ago?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it definitely makes
Joel, I got to
sense.
ask you the question that I ask everyone who comes on the podcast. What is your secret to scaling?
Secret to scaling. Um, yeah, like I would say, getting the right people in the right seats with the right process, like people
Cool.
and
I like that.
process, you know,
Yeah.
because like you could have like someone who goes through all of this and they're amazing, but maybe they don't have a knack for optimizing their own process. So
Mm,
like maybe they grind away doing something manually that was automated 3 years ago,
yeah.
you know? So yeah, when you've got those two things working perfectly together, then scale is a byproduct of that. Like excellent people, working in excellent processes.
Awesome. Awesome. I love that. Joel, I got three more questions for you. I hope you're ready.
Yep, I'm ready.
All right. First question, favorite tool or app that you're using right now?
Hmm. I personally like an app. It's called superpowered.me. So it basically will take all of your calendars and enable you to access them like with a keyboard shortcut. And 5 to 10 minutes before whatever meeting you have, it'll put a pop up on your screen and be like, join now. So you don't have to like go through your calendars and like find
Oh,
a meeting link to join it. Yeah.
oh, I like that. Oh, I
Yeah.
like that because I'm constantly searching around and waiting. And that's why you were early today.
Yeah, pretty much. Like before this app, I basically would have like a post-it note where I'm writing out like all my meetings for the day, and this
Wow.
replaces that. So it's a lot cleaner. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. That's great. Favorite podcast or audiobook you're listening to right now?
Well, obviously your podcast.
I mean, yes. Sorry, I should say besides this podcast. That's the kind thing to do, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, in terms of like books that I'm reading, I'm really enjoying Spin Selling.
Oh,
I don't
I've
know
never
if
read
you've
that.
ever read that one. The concept is like selling like a doctor, you know? Just kind
Okay.
of like
Yeah.
exploring pain points and just like in a conversational way rather than like, hey, like I can do this for you, I can do that for you. It's a more professional way to approach it. So yeah, I like
Cool.
it.
That's great. That I mean, that really fits with the methodologies that we believe in too. Like Sandler
Hmm.
is one of the kind of the selling system that we really love
Hmm.
because it's just pain, pain, pain. What's your pain? What's your pain? What's your pain? Do you want help? If you want help, we might be able to help you. Right.
Hmm.
That's basically what it is. And for me, coming from, I was a paramedic for 12 years. It's so natural just to go in and just ask a bunch of questions because you can't
Hmm.
do anything until you actually figure out what's going on. So that sounds like a great one. I'll make sure to we'll make sure to throw that down in the show notes as well. Joel, last
Hmm.
question for you. You just found out you have a year to live. What changes?
Oh wow, a year to live. Hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I'd probably reprioritize on my family. I got 4 kiddos and stuff, so probably try to make some memories with them, do some traveling and stuff, and try to make the most of it because that would suck.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Joel, thanks for your time today. Thanks for walking us through that process, guys. I hope that this process helps you. I know, like just listening to Joel, I'm like we're on the same page. It
Mm,
really works to be ruthless in your qualifying processes at first. That is really where we found the most success, that top of funnel, just making sure, and it's for them as well, right? Don't
yep.
waste anyone's time. You don't want to waste your time. Don't waste their time either,
Yep.
right? So that's what Joel's talked about here. Joel, where can people find out more about you and True Ops and then connect with you guys?
Yeah, so you can definitely, find me on LinkedIn and, happy to have a jam session anytime to talk about recruitment. I'm trying to build out like an Airtable app that can kind of replace Breezy for the applicant tracking piece. So,
Cool.
happy to compare notes about that with anybody. And then our website is trueops.ai, and that's for Amazon reimbursements. So if you're using Amazon FBA, then Amazon is destroying some of your inventory. So we just help get people money back for that.
Sweet. Joel, thank you so much. And speaking of Airtable, if anybody has been delving into Airtable and it's just like, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to do that, reach out to me. I've got a buddy of mine that is just an absolute expert. And if you want him to sit down with you for an hour and walk through that, please get a hold of me, guys. I'd love to send you over his way. Joel, thank you so much for your time today. What an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me.